You requested him, we got him. He's gonna be there. Producer, engineer, mixer extraordinaire. We've got a second ITL, a follow-up on last week you're gonna enjoy. Cue the confetti, it's Pensado's place.
Yay. Welcome to this week's Pensado's Fiasco. It's gonna be a lot of fun. It's gonna be great. It's gonna be, what's it gonna be? I'm running out of adjectives.
I think you covered it all. Let's not raise the bar too high.
One of these days, I'm gonna do one of these intros and actually vaguely look like I know what I'm doing and where I'm at.
Why change 65 straight weeks of ineptitude? Let's keep it
all
like it is.
three listeners seem to like it. They
Absolutely.
all write in.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, I had a lot of fun this week. Working with a great band called 10 Years. Not to be confused with 10 Years After, but 10 Years. Great band out of Nashville. Really, really cool stuff. I mean, extremely cool stuff.
Yeah, they're
Really
I've
enjoying
listened. It's good stuff.
Difficult, but I like the challenge, and it's like mixing 25 songs in one song. A lot of changes.
Well, that's part of what I like about their approach. Like they're not worried about the box. They sort of step outside the box and then.
Well, as my manager, I'm getting paid for this one, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah, cool.
I'd do it for free. I actually like this group a lot. They're really
But that's
great.
against your manager's rules. So
Sorry.
it's okay. Cool. What else happened? Anything else?
Well, no.
Did you read? I'll tell you what I read was interesting this morning. I get something called Digital Music News or something like that. And the views on YouTube of musical things, well, the views on YouTube are over 1 trillion plus annually. But the musical views are more than every service combined. Spotify, Pandora, Groove Shark, all of them. That's an amazing thing. And at some point in time,
sad, nobody gets paid for that.
well, not necessarily, but it might be an interesting show down the road about, where's your content being consumed, where your mix is being heard, how do you mix, do you mix for views, do you mix for
You should do that.
So we'll get to that.
Space so well. I'm still learning that area, but I find it fascinating.
Should we do some homework?
Let's do it.
As always, we say hello to our Vintage King family. Hello, Vintage King. Drew Townsend's in our chat room. And you got a question for Stump the Vintage King?
I do. It's not so much a stump question this week as it is a friend of mine, Jarmella, was wondering, she's trying to find a U87. In your experience, what microphone that you guys have run across at Vintage King most emulates and closest approximates the sound of a U87? I think a lot of people would like to know, because that is my island microphone. If I was stranded on an island, that'd be the one microphone I'd choose.
So there you go. Make sure you ask that question. You saw Drew's information up on the page. You also know to contact us in the usual spots, Facebook, Twitter, and make sure you go to our YouTube channel, like and subscribe. Very important stuff to do. We also want to shout out and say hello to our friends at Avid. Say hello to Avid.
What's up, what's up?
Avid. And
Anthony, our boy.
you can go to their website. I'm sure you're going to see it up on the screen. And the one place at home where you can aggregate all of our information, talk to us, communicate with us, see old shows, see whatever the case may be, is at our website, pensadosplace.tv. So we look for you there. Lots of good stuff going on, lots of good stuff coming, some changes in the works in a good way. And we also got a cool ITL, right? You want to get to that?
Yeah. Hey, you guys, if you guys like this ITL, let us know, because I think we kind of struck a nerve with this one. I guess is the right saying. People really seem to be responding, because if you like this one on vocals, I'll try to attempt to show you how to manipulate some of the things within instruments, within the mix itself, and how different frequencies give you different emotional feelings and that sort of thing. So this is the end of what we started last week. Okay, now the 10K, that's our frequency that can determine if we're doing a pop mix or a hip hop mix or a rock mix. Like in pop, you want that frequency to be just perfect, just like the right amount of sweetness in pecan pie. But in a hip hop mix, you don't want too much of that, because it gives you the feeling that it's not hip hop. Hip hop has a grand tradition from its founding of a lower amount of that that frequency. Some people might call it less fidelity, but it's not less fidelity. I think hip hop is the coolest sounding stuff ever. But you want a little less of that in your hip hop. Let me show you with and without that.
Everything that's ever meant anything. Everything that's ever meant anything.
Now, if you're on a laptop, some of these things are going to kind of go by you, and you're just going to have to trust me. You won't be able to hear them. Now, the 5K, this is my Jason Joshua frequency.
Everything that's ever meant anything.
Now, what I like about that frequency and why it's important is Bonnie, her emotion, her feeling, and her character and charm is the way she tails off the ends of words, and she has a lot of breath, like Brandy has a lot of breath, Mariah Carey had a lot of breath, and that's where their personalities are, Christina. So that frequency helps determine and give the listener a feeling about the attitude. Let me take it out.
Everything that's ever meant to.
Okay, listen real close to the end of thing.
Everything.
See, it's just a different, you just hear that it's just very subtle, but a few hundred of those in the song can make a difference. I'm going to exaggerate it just so you can hear it. I'm at like 1.8.
Everything that's ever meant anything is standing right here.
This is with less of it.
My everything that's ever meant.
See, all you hear is everything. What I say I had, I think 1.8, 2.8. I think I had 1.8.
Everything.
Yeah, that sounds good. And then here we got our low end. I didn't want to add anything above 100, but when I added a little bit of 100, it didn't quite feel right, so I added a little bit at 126. Actually, I didn't. I just added 100. Okay, here we go.
Everything. Everything.
I'm exaggerating. It just adds a little warmth on the bottom. Oh gosh, I said the W word, Will.
Everything that's ever meant anything.
So you can see what that kind of does. Now, let's hear it in the mix. I'm going to take just the EQs out of the mix, and let's see if we can learn something from that. Okay, here we go.
Everything that's ever meant anything.
Okay, listen to the two NGs and the breath on those two last words. Anything and watch.
Everything that's ever meant anything.
Okay, let's see if I've got a consonant in here somewhere that we can kind of play with.
Standing right here before my standing.
I don't. But trust me, the consonants are really coming through nicely. Okay, one other thing. I'm gonna breeze through some of the effects. Let's add the effects back. Here's our Bracasti buddy.
Everything that's ever meant anything.
We're just trying to put her in the same space as the drums. There's this real drummer, so that determines the space. So I want to make sure she sounds like she's in the same space as the drums. I'll play you that in a minute. Now this is an effect I inherited, but I liked. Now this is our old buddy doubler. I'll show you that in a minute.
Everything that's ever meant anything.
Now the output of the doubler, if you recall, I sent it to two wideners from Waves, the S1 and the PSS. So it sounds. Now this is the delay that I wanted the delay to sound like we were listening in our mind. You know how like sometimes the radio frequencies in the old movies they made it that they used it so you could hear people's thoughts. You know.
Everything that's ever meant anything is standing right here.
Okay, so it's very lo-fi, very mid-rangey. Now this is the one I really want to show you. This is the most important one. this is going to a compressor. It doesn't matter what compressor it goes to, and then the output of that compressor is going to a limiter, and I'm taking off maybe 2 or 3 dB from each. Now it's bone dry. In fact, I rolled a little bit of top end off of it, a little bit of low end. I'm not showing it to you because I want you to learn this because it's very important. The effects made the vocal go back in the mix a little bit. Now watch what happens when I add this compressor. It brings the vocal back to the front because it's a very steady level because of the compression, but it gives you the feeling that the vocal moved forward in the mix. Watch this. I'm on 20, minus 20, so this is without it.
Everything.
You know what, I'm gonna do a shorter thing so we can kinda, so I'm gonna bring it up and watch what happens.
Everything, 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 everything.
It doesn't really change the sound, it just gives you the impression that the vocal is standing in front of all the instruments. Were you able to hear that well? Did it come through? Okay, real quick. Here's the setting for the doubler. I'll leave that up there for a second, and then I'm widening that too. So I hope that kind of gave you a little bit of a different insight than some of the other things I've seen on the web. Don't think of frequencies as negative things or positive things. Think of them as generating an emotion or covering up an emotion, and you're trying to get that feeling and emotion out of that vocal. Let me play you a little piece of what happens when the guitars come in.
I never see all my dreams come true. The one that mattered the most was you. The one I ever wanted, all I ever needed. You've given me something to hold on to.
It competes with the guitars. It's a ballsy, gutsy sound. So I didn't have to turn it too loud. It just sits where it should sit. It's a power ballad. So send me some questions if there's something you don't understand or you need amplification on. But I think that should get you started in a new way to think. You don't use my ideas. Just use my concepts to get you thinking in a direction. Practice this stuff, and I'm telling you, it'll open up a lot of worlds for you. And like I said, I always say, don't think about it just for vocals. Think about it for guitars also, for pianos also. Everything contributes a little bit of emotion and energy to a song. And instead of focusing on making something sound good, focus on making it feel good and give you the emotional feeling and the vibe that you want it to. Hope you got something from that. Okay, guys. Guys, I've been wanting for a long talking about Southern people applying for apartments. I got a degree in English from Sears. I really been wanting to have Ross Hogarth on the show for a long time. Ross and I, our paths have crossed so much. Just recently crossed with a friend of ours, Dave Huff, and I think the thing that I most look forward to talking with Ross about is his path to success. It's going to be very instructive. Ross, welcome to the show. That was the worst introduction in 60 shows.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
But 2 Grammys, right? You got 2 Grammys now?
Yeah, Keb Mo and Ziggy Marley.
Wow.
Oh, I love Ziggy Marley. And guys, we're going to go over some of these. He just finished the new Van Halen record. I think it's great. Eddie Van Halen's the reason I'm an engineer, because when I heard him, I figured no point play guitar again. Black Crowes, R.E.M., a couple of Atlanta guys, I might add. Motley Crue, David Lindley, who I could make an entire week about this guy, David Lindley. We'll talk about some of these other ones, but man, your career path is like not instructive for anyone, so would you talk about it? I mean, the path
why do you say that?
Well, because most guys they decide they want to be an engineer, so they go to school, they graduate, they choose L.A., Nashville, New York. They go there, they work at a studio, they become an intern, then a runner, then an assistant, then they meet Puffy, and then they work for him for 6 years, and they get a bunch of #1 records with Puffy, and then they go out. Your path was like, Lord knows, you're sitting up in New York learning guitar from Bob Seger, the famous folk singer guy. Pete Seeger.
Yeah.
Bob Seger from Detroit. And then take it from there.
Well, I mean, I grew up in New York, so my family's best friends were the Seegers. My mom, Pete Seeger, actually, she still lives about a mile or, like quarter mile from his house in Cold Spring. So I was around the whole folk scene growing up, through them.
That was a lot of help in your later years.
Well, yeah, I mean, first off, I learned how to play every stringed instrument around that whole circle of what was the Clearwater Sloop, which is the sloop that was created to go up and down the Hudson River and clean up the Hudson, which before it used not to be swimmable, but it is now because of Pete Seeger.
Wow.
So you can actually swim in the Hudson River.
That's right. He was very active.
Yeah, very
space.
active in that.
Yep.
So I learned how to play banjo and mandolin and fiddle, and at the same time, I was as a kid, I was growing up in rock and punk, and so I was playing guitar in punk bands in the city and in the scene in New York, and the music I was hearing in my head, I wasn't getting out of my hands. I actually gotten to the point where I wasn't, I was kind of beyond what was coming through my hands, and I also was just in a rut in the city. Everyone kind of says this, if they would have been dead if they never left a place that was not good for them. So I got out and came to the West Coast, and got into being a roadie because I played drums initially. I worked for Jim.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Okay. You learn banjo from Pete Seeger. You go to New York, hate it, but you also played drums, so that you.
Yeah, I played drums. I played
You're starting
French.
to see my point about this, right?
I know it is. It's
okay.
like it seems so logical to me, but that logic is
But
not.
you were playing guitar. That became frustrating. You moved to L.A. to play drums.
Well, I moved to L.A. to actually get out of New York, just plain and simple, just get out, and ended up between San Francisco and L.A. My oldest brother was living out here, and long story short, I ended up meeting Jim Keltner and the whole circle, what we call the Mellow Mafia, which is Jackson Browne, David Lindley, Ry Cooder, Bonnie Raitt, Little Feat, Keltner, God bless his soul, Ian Wallace, who was in El Rayo X. So I ended up becoming a roadie. I was guitar roadie for Bonnie and Lindley and Ry and Jackson with Lindley with Jackson Browne. Keltner, Ian Wallace, Joe Lala was a percussion player, played with Manassas. So I basically got into what I call service, which is taking care of musicians and being of service. My whole mentality, which served me later in life, besides anything musical, was to make sure that every time Bonnie or Lindley or any one of these people stepped on stage, that I made their cables. I knew that I had spare amps. I know that everything service-oriented related to getting them on that stage. When they walked out there, the only thing for them to think about was making music.
And at this point in time, had you even thought about becoming an engineer?
Well, growing up, I was always the guy that was into putting the sound system together for our bands. I was always the guy doing demos, like having little, Well, I think a big turning point came for me when I met, through family, a guy named Dick Lieb, who was the horn trombone player on The Tonight Show. And he had a Moog system that was like a library ladder. You'd have to go up to patch stuff in. And I was just a young pup. I'd go over to Dick Lieb's place where he'd be making music on his Moog system, one of the earliest ones. And that was like, this is incredible. This is sounds, and this is a technology. And
so that was your first exposure to recording?
Well, it's my first exposure to that thing, which was like, this is exciting, and I don't know anything about it, because we did, my studio is called Boogie Motel, which is sort of a homage to Boogie Hotel on Long Island, which is where Foghat made their records. And because I was part of the whole punk scene in New York,
I always thought Foghat was a West Coast band.
No. Foghat was
Free Ride. And all
yeah,
that?
Free Ride. They were sort of based in Long Island, and they made their records in their studio out on Long Island, Boogie Hotel, and that was the first studio I ever worked in. And I caught the bug really early on. That thing, which I didn't really get to nurture. It was sort of like something that sits in you for years and then it finally has a chance to come out. So I went through that path, that roundabout path of being on the road, but that working with those artists like Lindley or Bonnie, every time they'd make a record or even doing guitars for Lindsey Buckingham, when they'd go in the studio, I would be there as the trusted guy to go set up their gear, and then like Lindley would turn to me and he'd say, hey man, go out and make sure my stuff's sounding like it's supposed to, and then I'd come in the control room and then I'd listen to the speakers, and I got really early on like.
How old were you now?
Man, I was just a teen. I was just a teenager. Like I left. Wow. Yeah, I was on the road when I was 16,
Did you realize
17.
that you were amongst that level of greatness and musicianship?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, that was why it was one of those things where I believe lucky breaks aren't. It's like ask anyone that works really hard about his lucky break.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
It's like. What's a lucky break but a door that opens and you see it opening and you go
ready.
You just go through
Absolutely.
it. And
Absolutely.
so these doors opened up for me and I was there. I was that guy that never stopped work. I was that guy I'd come off of like a Lindley tour and I'd go right out with Rye, or I'd go in the studio, with one guy and another guy and another guy.
How did that get you into getting the trust of people to let you produce and engineer their records? That's a big gap.
Yeah, the producing part came later. I mean, honestly, I got into the studio through particularly one guy, Don Gaiman, I had gotten off the road with Christine McVie. I mean, actually, I keep bopping around because I was a roadie and made records like, with Mick Fleetwood, and we had, set up in Mick's house, and I was with David Lindley, El Rayo X, so I was already engineering records and still on the road, still working on the road, and didn't really get until we did Christine McVie's record in 1984, and the transition from 82, 83, 84 was really mega, because in like 82, 83, I had the chance to work with Don Gaiman, and Don was very influential. He worked a lot out at Rumbo, which was his favorite studio that we ultimately...
Captain Tennille's studio.
Captain and Tennille's, and that was the home of rock in the Valley. Yeah. And we eventually took that studio and built John Mellencamp studio, Belmont Mall, out of the design of that studio. So Don was that guy that saw in me, which is everything that you want when you're bringing someone out of, up through the world, these young kids that we all want to mentor and feed forward and be the future. At that point in time, I was that kid that was, Don saw something in me, and he put me in those positions that I was so over my head, but knew that, that I would come through. And the situation out at Rumbo was great because there were people like Richie Zito, who was a guitar player for Giorgio Moroder, and he was working on Giorgio's records, but also starting to produce for himself. Richie went on to then produce Heart, Cheap Trick, huge records. Wow. So Richie brought me into Moroder's world, so I started to engineer for Giorgio Moroder. So that's where, for me,
How old were you then?
22, 23.
So that's like 5 years, 4 years.
Yeah.
I want to be a roadie.
Yeah, so what I learned was service on the road. I learned musicians, I learned politics, I learned how to be a production manager, how to get things done, how to scramble and never get to say, oh, that didn't work today. Sorry, your show didn't happen because I didn't, your spare amp went, I didn't have a spare amp, your amp went down, and now you got to stand there in front of thousands. So you don't have that choice on the road. So you learn on the road to be prepared, to think forward and to anticipate, to be one step ahead at all times.
Because you managers kind of.
Well, yeah,
it's the same mindset.
And you're working with managers and road managers, and you're working with tour accountants. So you're learning this whole aspect. So by the time I got off the road, the last thing I was going to do was clean toilets. It was like I had already kind of gone that route. Musicians are very finicky people. I mean, you have to be able to put up with their idiosyncrasies and the things that make them unique. And on the road, those things come out when they're tired and they're pissed off. And
you know what? You just reminded me of something that we were talking about on the phone the other day. Guys, one of my favorite musicians of all time is David Lindley.
Yeah.
I learned to play slide from my mom, and David Lindley's one of the best at that. And David was kind of quirky, to say the least, or still is. And I'm wondering,
And I learned more from him. I learned, not more, but I learned as much from him as from anyone in my life.
I've always maintained that you show me a guy with no personality, and I'll show you a guy that can't make a decent record on any level.
Absolutely.
It seems
yeah.
like creativity is contained in the same vessel that just flat out weirdness is. Herb and I have a mutual friend who's one of the most amazing musicians we know, and he's just flat out crazy right now. And I think the two go hand in hand. I'm not sure you can have the creativity without the idiosyncrasies, let's call them, to
totally.
be polite. And Lindley was certainly idiosyncratic, to
Well,
say
I mean,
the
you go
least.
back to, I mean, not to say my father was crazy. My father was a famous illustrator. He was the original illustrator, Tarzan, and started the School of Visual Arts, which he ended up selling out. But my dad was, you know, people say, oh, you know, your dad was batshit crazy. And I go, yeah, he really was, you know, but his students loved him. You know, that was the thing. It was like, he was crazy, but his whole desire to make kids listen and think for themselves was his whole thing. David Lindley, same thing. I remember I got Lindley's, I became his guitar tech. The litmus test he put through, he had a Mando guitar, which was a 12-string Vox tear-shaped instrument. And we used to, the place in the valley
He
called...
only used crazy guitars.
Yeah, it was like Silvertones, Tyscos. I mean, and that was the thing with Lindley. I tuned and strung and took his guitars. I was his guy for like, you know, 5 years, 5 solid years. His fiddles, his bazookas, his sazes. And, you know, from Jackson to Lindley to El Rayo X to his solo things with Rye and stuff. And one of the things that he put me in a room and he said, okay, I tuned this down to E flat. We'll be playing in F. So first off, if you're not a musician, you're done. He needed someone who wasn't just a guy who could. So the first thing he did was slack tune this 12-string instrument, just went, and then handed it to me. He goes, we'll be playing in F, but I want this in natural E flat, like, you know, straight E flat, not like an open tuning. And he goes, I want it in tune by the time we finish our song. And this was like it was just the heat of summer, and I was just a kid, and I sweat this whole guitar because I was dripping sweat all over the thing, putting it up to my ear, trying to figure out, well, that's F, and so I had to like generate all my past music and at the same time use my ear and tune it by ear. And I handed it back to Lindley, and it was pretty close to tune. And you know, and that was that was my introduction to him. You know, so it's like, and you know, for the years that I spent with him, I learned ear training, and I learned people training, and I learned a lot. You know.
Did you do some work with Mick Fleetwood?
Yeah, for years.
Do you know
yeah.
Richard Dashett?
Very well, very, very well. Yeah.
I spent 6 of my most seminal years in learning was at Richard and Mick's house in Malibu.
The whale, the blue whale.
Underneath Paradise.
Yeah. What years?
God, I started my record career. I'll have to get back to you
Okay,
on that.
because I was up there with Dennis Mays making his record in the early '80s. Billy Burnett and
We may have
Ian
crossed
Wallace.
paths.
Yeah.
Because when you said that, so and I won't. They're fascinating stories, but it was the same.
Anyway, I
point.
mean, we
You
can.
want to go into the reasons why you guys didn't recognize each other at that time, or should we just blow past
Well,
that?
yeah.
Lighter skin.
Yeah, the word blow. You'll blow past that.
But you learn from those you learn from those idiosyncratic personalities that are sort of genius by spending time, and it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I think that the greatest musicians have to be crazy. You know, they it's almost like, what's the word crazy? But I mean, they are, you know, generally people that have locked themselves away to get their craft. It's like that 10,000 hours concept or whatever that's been bandied about a lot lately because, you know, lately there's a lot of conversation about what does it take to be, you know, to make, you know, to be great in your craft. And I mean, this web, you know, the internet and the kind of education that kids are getting through your show and the kind of gift that you give of your knowledge. You know, when I came up and I was able to go into a United Western or a Capitol or an A&M with, like, what would happen would be, you know, say Keltner. I'd take Keltner's drums over to, you know, the record plant, to the old record plant, or to Capitol, but at that time you'd be there in a coffee room and you'd have producer engineers coming through, and you got the opportunity to have that stuff rub off.
Absolutely.
The only way kids get it these days is through this. And so, you know, I don't know how many, you know, kids are actually still sitting in their room, just, you know, really focused on their craft, and I think that's missed. And I think to do that and have that kind of focus, you have to be somewhat, you know.
It could be argued that maybe they are, but maybe instead of doing it with a guitar, they're doing it with Ableton, or maybe they're doing it with.
Yeah, it's a different.
Yeah, it's a different kind of woodshedding than we did, but I think it's still 100% valid. I love music's music, and Lord knows they're crazy enough, just like we were, to make good music.
I love that you are into Lindley. That's, I mean, when you
Yeah.
bring his name, it just warms. You know, it's like.
I've always enjoyed musicians that do things that I just can't do.
Wear a lot of
And
polyester on stage.
I can play the same notes as Lindley. They just don't sound the same. It's like there's something about the way he gets to a note a little late, the way he leaves the note a little late. It's just he's just got this feel that in the South we pride ourselves on feel and tend to look down at other parts of the world. But Lindley was like one of us. He had that feel. He didn't have that stiff West Coast kind of thing. No offense.
Well,
I wanted to see if you were paying attention.
Dave and I, we bonded recently over slide guitar because that's kind of where I went to. When I got into being a roadie, you know, was the word prided? But
We'll go for it.
Yeah, okay. I prided myself on the ability to work with, because slide guitar is, I mean, tuning, like Ry Cooder never wanted his guitar in tune because he was all temper tuned. So I learned the first time I handed him a guitar that was perfectly in tune, like strobe tuned, and he was, you know, he got upset. And I learned with Lindley where his tuning was and his double neck lap steels, and you know, and slide guitar is something that, you know, it's really a very soulful. It comes from the blues. It comes from, you know, Big Bill Brunsey and Robert Johnson, and that's to me where when I was working with those players, they had so much soul, and it was something. You talk about not getting paid, like I do it for free. That's the way I felt. I felt like I was going to school on the road. Like when you asked me what college I went to the school of the road, and when I got off the road, it was a very concerted decision that I wanted to work in all styles of music. I didn't want to ever get pigeonholed. And that's been something I've done my whole career. People look at my discography and they go, oh, you know, Ziggy Marley, but you made a Devil Driver record right after Ziggy Marley. And
That
then,
was a good record.
you know, it's
What
like
was the kid's name? He was in the other...
Cold Chamber. I produced Cold Chamber too.
Yeah.
Des
That was a good
Fafara.
record.
Yeah, so it's like, for me, it's all music. I grew up listening to jazz and classical, and for me, I you know, the part that was the excitement and is the excitement is that it's all music, whether it's a guy screaming or whether it's Kev Mo, you know, that's the juice comes from, I think, the keeping interested, keeping that excitement.
Let's talk about guitars. Half the world is really comfortable with guitars, the rockers. The other half of the world, some of the urban side of the world, they're not comfortable with guitars. What can we do with our urban audience that would take the fear out of grabbing a guitar and putting it on a track that they're working on? It's not that hard to record one. I mean, for the guy that's just sitting at home that's never seen one, what should he do?
Well, the first thing that pops into my mind, because we've been talking about slide, whenever I'm
Don't
going to
do that.
Well, no, but the thing that with slide guitar, and it goes back to the old blues thing, is open tunings. That,
Good point. I never
frankly,
thought about that.
you know, if you are daunted by having to fret a guitar, learn how to put it into an open tuning. Tune it to your track, so all you have to do is place your finger, go blank on it.
What he's talking about is take a guitar, the low string, the fat string, tune that to a D, leave the A where it is, leave the third string as a D, then the G string or the fourth string, tune that down to F sharp, the B string tuned down to A, and then the E string to D, and you've got an open D tuning. You can play. You can just touch any fret. You see some guitar players, especially acoustic guitar players, they look like they're just having one finger. Wouldn't you say a drop D is the most popular open
Absolutely,
tuning?
yeah, absolutely. Just the D down.
Try that. Okay,
But that's one thing.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, that's one thing that I always say is, you know, just become undaunted by having to fret, because the guitar is actually mathematically a very hard instrument to figure out.
Yeah, because it's in fourths.
Yeah, and then you end up with the B and the G, so that's one thing. There are great, as far as recording. Obviously, we can get into.
Well, just the basics. Just like when you were first starting, what do you remember about something you can share with like a rap guy that wants to put some guitar on his record?
I mean, it's great. You can go plug in straight into Waves guitar or Digi 11 or. Actually, a good friend of mine, who's the son of the guitar player in the Doobie Brothers, Shane McPhee, has a plugin called Recabinet, which is just cabinets. So you can just plug into an amp simulator and then put on Recabinet, and you have cabinets. So, I mean, the actual craft of guitar is another story. I mean, that's why I say the open tuning, finding a way so that you don't have to think too hard about trying to make music or.
But you'd recommend not miking a guitar, but just going straight in and then using an amp simulator to change the tone?
If you're, because you immediately brought up hip hop, and I'm thinking about people living in laptops or in small spaces.
Exactly.
I mean, because it's, guitars are generally loud. If, acoustic guitars, not, but, you have to have a microphone, and there aren't that many acoustic guitar simulators. I just haven't found one. But electric guitar is very easy to DI, direct into a, Waves guitar or any one of the, IK plugins, those, all those, and you get Insta Guitar. It's bam, Insta Guitar. But then you got to know what to do with it. And so, my thing about the open tuning is that you're going to get some result pretty quickly if your ear is connected, and.
Exactly.
Anyway, I don't know.
It's hard to get to a minor chord, but that's not that big a deal.
Well, you can do minor tuning.
Yeah, that's true. So, on the new Van Halen record, man, when you started that in like 2012, you started that 3 years ago,
yeah.
Right? Different kind of truth. When I scour the internet for opinions, a lot of opinions about that record. It's kind of weird. I thought it was a great record, but like I said, Eddie Van Halen, I think, is one of the most underrated musicians ever. He's a monster keyboard player. His hearing, his sense of pitch is just flawless. I mean, the guy is really deserving of his status as top 5 guitar player to have ever lived. When you were working with him, I noticed on all his older records, he always used a delay to kind of get a stereo sound from one part, and he never stacked his guitars a whole lot.
No, the whole Eddie thing. I mean, the thing with Eddie is, and not just Eddie, but Van Halen, because Van Halen is, and I mean, the two brothers they're brothers. They're brothers bonded for life, and you talk about classical. They grew up playing classical piano. The two of them were, they play, piano.
Didn't Alex start guitar first?
Alex was a guitar, Eddie was a drummer. They ended up swapping.
Yeah.
They were both better at either. But they played piano before that. They came over from Holland. Eddie...
On Jump, that's Eddie playing piano.
Yeah, playing the
keyboard.
Yeah. I mean, Eddie tells a funny story about how when they came out, they were taken to Long Beach to this amazing piano teacher to be trained to play these competitions. But Eddie was not he doesn't read music. Like if you ask Eddie who the greatest guitar player is, it's Steve Lukather, his best buddy, because Luke can actually read chart, and he still has the chops and stuff, which is interesting. And Luke goes, he never says that, but Eddie does. But as far as with Ed, he would take these piano lessons, and he would watch the hands, and the teacher would be like, "Don't you want to look at the music?" He'd go, "No, play it again." And then he'd take it into competition, and he'd win these competitions, and a lot of times the notes were like interesting interpretation. Well, wow. It was an interpretation because it was completely eye and ear. Right. It was not playing the notes.
I got a couple of buddies that can do that. Greg Curtis can do that, and a buddy of mine in Atlanta, Kevin Kendrick from Cameo. He's like that. Just play it. Just see it, hear it, play it. I wish I had that gift.
So with Ed, it was like coming into that project, the guys were up at the house with Wolfie, his son, who is just the most gifted and amazing musician himself. And obviously the apple never fell far from the tree there. And they were working on the songs and working on their sonic palette. And one of the things that I had always felt about Eddie's guitar was, And going back to your question, or just the question about what Eddie is a guy that will play the whole song. Like, that's what Van Halen always was that you don't stop the rhythm. You don't, it's like you don't play rhythm over the solo. You don't figure out a rhythm for the solo, which is a very, very,
in guitar circles, that's sacred territory, solos.
yeah, and a lot of guitar players just leave the solo. Like when you're tracking, how many records have you made where you just rhythm over the solo and then you'll come back to the solo later?
The solo.
But the whole thing with Van Halen was that Alex would do his drum thing. It's almost like The Who or something where, because they're coming from that classic rock. Everyone thinks, oh, Van Halen's heavy metal, but no, they're really classic rock. It's Led Zeppelin or The Who. And like Ed's favorite guitar is Clapton. And so when they would hit a solo, it was always Eddie would play the solo, and then Alex, whatever he played on the drums was about the solo. So you try on most of the songs and most of their records, if you'd ever make Ed, having worked with Ted Templeman on the Doobie Brothers, just one of the last records, like I talked to Ted about it even before working with Van Halen, sometimes Ted would make Eddie not play a solo, and the whole track would fall down when they would go to cut the track. Because Alex wouldn't know what to play, and Eddie wouldn't know what to play because he'd always soloed. So each solo is a expression of that moment. And Alex's thing isn't figured out, and Eddie's thing isn't figured out. He might have, melody mile markers or something.
Wow.
But so when you're looking at tracking Van Halen, you're looking at the guitar sound needing to be, be wide, and that's why initially it was just a mono amp, and then they would delay, reverb, and they put a reverb with a delay over to the other side, and the story goes, and I don't know if this is urban legend or whatever, that Eddie, when they played back the first record at one of his friends' houses, the speaker was out on the side that the guitar was panned to. And there was no guitar on the record. They were listening back to his record, but since the guitar was really hard panned left, the actual main sound, and that speaker was out, there was no guitar. And Eddie, from that day forward, then started to electronically make sure that the guitar was split wide, and they'd use harmonizers.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So anyway, coming into the record for me, my whole thing was, what can I bring to the table here to bring something special or upgrade in some way the greatest living guitar player? He doesn't really need me. I mean, it's like, but I am here. So what am I going to, and so first you use your people skills to communicate. You don't just come in and go, hey, let me just, show you.
No, you can't do that.
No. And so you inch your way into a point where there's trust, and you go, hey, let's check something out today. I want to try some things. And we started to split the two heads and two cabinets, and I brought in ribbon microphones, and we got to a point where, like on this record, the sound of the guitar is out of two heads and two cabinets. It's, one instrument split, and so those two cabinets they breathe wide. They don't.
Exactly.
And
one thing's
sorry.
That first album that Ted Templeman did, the panning on that is like,
it's great.
It's great,
yeah.
Guys. I guess the first album is just called Van Halen, right?
Yeah.
And the drums will be panned hard one side, the guitar will be panned one side, vocals will be one side, but it works. It's kind of bizarre. And I remember.
Go ahead.
Well, I remember when I first started engineering, I tried like 30 times to get somebody to let me do that, and everybody was like, "Get that crap out of here. That's horrible." And finally, my buddy Keith Andes let me do it on a record.
Tee up batter's box, sir. Clock is running.
Are you serious?
Clock is running fast.
Man, I only got to ask one question.
Oh man, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
Are you ready for this?
I guess.
You seemed a little hesitant in the green room, so are you green room? Catch that? We got a green room. Okay, lead vocals.
So set me up one more time on this. So
Just
you're going
tell
to
me
throw
what plug-in or
okay,
piece of
all right,
outboard gear comes to mind first.
Okay, E6 filter bank.
Ooh, my God. Background vocals.
1176 or any emulation of thereof.
Acoustic guitar.
Neve 1081 or some V EQ.
Oh, from Waves.
Yeah.
He's doing good, Herb. He might beat me. I'm getting scared. I got him now. A rap lead vocal.
I do so little rap. Distortion.
Okay. Piano.
Lots of compression. EMI, Chandler EMI
wow.
plug-in compression.
I love that. Synth strings.
Ooh, roll the top end off. Get detoxify them with any EQ.
E6 would work.
Yeah.
Bass.
The hardest thing in the box, V-comp, 4-to-1.
Really? Okay. That's not very hard. 4-to-1's down there in that girly range.
No, but it's just the hardest thing in the box.
Oh,
is
I got
bass,
you.
yeah.
Oh, because of the yeah. Okay, electric guitar.
So this is, I can't say stuff like "get out of the way."
Yeah, you can.
Absolutely.
No,
I
no,
think that's
no,
the best. Don't do anything to an electric guitar.
no compression.
Yeah. Just a footnote.
Well, I mean, a heavy guitar. Are you talking about?
Guitar players are the one performers that spend so much time getting their sound exactly the way they want it. You probably don't have to do anything with the guitars.
But the good ones, yeah.
Overheads.
550, the API 550As,
Okay. And
which is Waves 550As or any emulation.
yeah,
there.
that's a great emulation.
Yeah,
but,
it's amazing, and they did a great job.
room mics for drums.
Now, if they've been, I can't say if they've been compressed. You have to really watch that, but compression, good compression.
Okay.
Either SSL or URS Strip Pro, great for rooms.
Never used that. I have to try that.
Slamming.
Stereo bus. You can go anything, analog, just
Okay.
plug in whatever.
Yeah. The three main API 2500, C1 or an SSL, and most recently for me the Obsidian compressor, which is like it's got a high pass in it. So it's
I'm not familiar with that compressor.
yeah, the Dramastic Obsidian, which is like a C1. It's like an SSL, except it's got a high pass.
Smart C1.
Yeah, I have an Allen Smart. Yeah.
What's the difference between the Allen Smart C1 and like the SSL, like the SSL single rack compressor? Are they?
It's the VCA. It's got a smoother sound.
Allen Smart does.
I really enjoy the sound of that.
Cool. Well, you did pretty good, Herb.
Dude,
I think you
you're
got
great.
me.
Yeah, particularly because he hedged at the moment and then stepped in really hard.
I
and
think he
dealt.
set me up with those first three, but I got him with the rap vocal.
Yeah.
That's the same as a crossover dribble. You went one way and he went the other. It was good.
Should I ask him what the hell did he mean by distortion on a
No,
rap
no,
vocal?
no, because that would not be good.
That wouldn't be good.
No, no, no.
I do use I do use the Sound Toys decapitator on rap vocals.
Well, that's what I. Yeah.
So,
That's what he meant.
Exactly. Yeah.
Let's introduce really quickly our man Drew Adams in the corner office. Drew, you over there?
What the deal?
How are you?
What's happening?
So let's see. You got a few questions for us over there?
I do.
Alrighty, so let's get to that.
First one from Jam Pop. Ross, on a project where you're producer, engineer, and mixer, i.e. Van Halen record, he wants to know whether you treat each role separately or are they all rolled into one, and how does that aid your workflow?
well, that's you.
Yeah.
What the hell?
Yeah. Well, I everything I produce, I engineer. So every record I've produced, I actually engineer and mix or will mix most of it. So, I mean, but the role of a producer is definitely the role of a producer, and the role of an engineer is the role of an engineer. And I love the part of being the engineer that gets to complete the vision of the producer. So that's.
So you've never thought about firing yourself?
Yeah, it's like, hello. I actually, the engineering part I love so much. I really do. And I really do. I love that part, and I find that I couldn't separate the two. So I find that the sonic vision, but as a producer, I get to choose, tempos and arrangements and use my musical, really roll up my sleeves musically, whereas an engineer, a lot of times, depending on the producer I'm working for, I have to be very sensitive to that. You never, as an engineer, want to be a frustrated producer, ever.
I agree.
It's a really
a mixer too should never be a frustrated producer.
no. You really have to listen to the needs of the producer first. So when I get to produce, I get to not have to walk that territory, but I get to have that full realm, and and have that. And so, with someone like Ziggy Marley, it was just such a fruitful relationship, and is a fruitful relationship between the two of us, because I don't have to look at a producer and wonder, I get to go straight to the source. And Ziggy's someone who really likes straight talk. So,
Well,
It's, you know.
Very cool, very cool.
Jim, you got another one?
Yeah, I do. From Marshall Dickerson. Hey, Dave and Ross. Can you please talk about what math you're using to make sure your reverb tails are in time with the song?
What math we use?
If there is any math.
I just use a chart. I just look up a delay chart, or sometimes if I'll use the stock plug-in from Avid and just see what the number is. You know what I'm saying? It already comes up.
It's an interesting question because, and that goes to a couple of things. First off, if you want something to be completely invisible, use a delay that's in time with the track.
Maybe I answered the wrong question. I see what you're saying.
No, but he's saying reverb tails too, like the length of a reverb tail.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I actually have never thought about the length of a reverb tail. I do think a lot about the pre-delay and the delay.
Me too.
Because a lot of times I want my delays I want to hear them, so I won't go with a time delay. And actually, something very specifically not in time because you actually want to hear it bounce. But if you want your delay to become reverb, use a time delay, like use a dotted eighth or a quarter note, because that'll, get sponged into the rhythm of the track.
Right.
And, I use delays a lot of times instead of reverb, because I tend to find reverb very specific. I mean, thank God for Bricasti, honestly. That reverb is amazing, and those presets are amazing. And I honestly have rarely ever changed a Bricasti preset. I just find the one that works.
Sunset Chamber and A&M Chamber are my two favorites.
Bam.
They just
And so I don't actually think about the reverb tail. I think about the pre-delay, though.
reverb. We just kind of feel.
It's a feel thing. Yeah,
Let me expand on Marshall's question. And this isn't exactly the question, Marshall, but Ross reminded me about what we do sometimes. If you don't want the reverb to be heard, like say in a rap situation, but you want to widen the vocal a little, use the pre-delay to tuck it behind another beat. So if you're like 16th note delay is like 100 beats per minute, I'm gonna have to sneeze in a minute here. That's a first. You might try using like an 8th note delay to tuck the beginning of the reverb behind a beat. Think about that and experiment with that, and that'll help you learn and expand on something that Ross just gave us an answer, which was an excellent answer.
Couple more.
All right, one for you, Herb, from 2 Redick. I'm European Union citizen. Is there any chance for me to get a publishing deal or any other music industry deal in the U.S. with no employment visa?
With no what?
With no employment visa.
The question about your visa is about where you are physically. So if you're going to work in Europe and you want to get a deal here, you can do that. But it's about where you're going to make your residency and where you're going to earn your money. You want to get legal information to make sure that you're in good stead. I've managed other people who were based here, were from other countries, and it's all cool till somebody pulls the card on you, and then you're gonna be in real trouble. So it's about where you're situated, where you're living, where your place of business is, and if you separate those two things, you can work overseas and still do stuff in America. One more.
Very cool.
Our clock is running.
Yeah, you guys touched on this a bit earlier, but the Trolls B. Knudsen wants to know, where do you use distortion and what kind do you use, if specifically speaking?
Well, for me, distortion is your friend. Harmonic, any kind of, well, first off, distortion will hold a sound in a track. So you may not know, but old classic microphones had a lot of distortion on them, and
Everything had a lot of distortion.
And exactly, and one of the reasons we love those records is because they have amazing harmonic distortion that is pleasing. So you have to actually be liberal with your use of distortion, I think, and not be afraid of it. You can, particularly bass. I mean, you can actually put a ton gob on bass, and it just brings it out. And,
right to the front.
Yeah, and vocals, particularly some kind of saturation. I mean, saturation is amazing on vocals. Really will hold the vocal up without it being compressed or overly compressed sounding. And then distortion, particularly distortion, tucked in behind a vocal will hold that vocal up without having to do, like vocals that may have some fluctuation, I'll just tuck distortion behind and it really makes them stand out. So,
Hey, Charles, it was Charles, right, Drew?
Was
Charles,
Trolls.
the problem with distortion is that it's called distortion, and so everybody thinks it's some kind of Elephant Man plug-in. Distortion should be called, they should change the name to a rich collection of harmonics,
Yeah.
because if you take a sine wave and then you half that sine wave, now your sine wave, instead of being like this, is now like this. Now if you half that frequency again, all those little bumps get halved till ultimately you get a square wave. Now a square wave is the classic definition of what distortion is. So by that logic, which is accurate, it's just taking more and more frequencies, adding them to each other, and you get the square wave. So the reason distortion works in the way Charles so aptly put it, Ross so aptly put it, Charles is the question, is because it's not something grotesque that you're adding an enriched source of harmonics, which is what analog gear is known to do. If you took the specifications on the classic analog gear and tried to sell that as something modern, it wouldn't sell because the distortion specifications would be too horrible for anybody to want to own. So think of it as a rich collection of harmonics, experiment with its use. Whenever you think you've got it right, back it off 10 dB.
Yeah.
Because if you hear it as too much, it should be something you feel.
So I've got a question for you. We only scratched the surface, which means you have to come back.
I would love to.
Will you do that?
Yes.
Did you have a good time?
This was great.
It goes fast.
So fast.
Yeah.
I mean, blink your eye and I feel like maybe I don't want to feel verbose, but you're asking me questions and
No, it's perfect.
so,
That's why we want to have you back.
Yeah, thanks.
Listen, verbose lives at this table, to say the least.
That's the middle name.
Thanks so much.
Thank you
man.
so much
What
for
a
having
pleasure.
me. Really.
What a pleasure.
Hey Ross,
Yeah.
where
Mad
can I
respect.
find you now on forums and on the forum world?
Terry Manning and I had Whatever Works on the Pro Sound Web, and we moved that to what's called Engineering 2012, which is, we'll give you the link. I don't have it off the tip of my tongue, but
We'll put it up.
Terry
We'll put it inside
Manning
the
and I
show.
moved our forum last year away from the PSW, and so we have our own forum still, which used to be called Whatever Works, and it's still in engineering and production.
You and Brower and Brad Blackwood and
Yeah.
Terry, and man, I used to learn so much from your forums.
And
I'm glad
that's
you're
the
still
online
going.
mentorship that you guys,
Right.
I really hand it to you for
Great, thanks.
It's really important. It's
Guests
a very
like this
important show.
make all the world. And we'll make sure we'll put that in the show. Say goodbye. Clock's running.
Goodbye. Clock's running. No, guys, listen, it's been a wonderful show. I had a million questions. I got to ask one big, long-ass, not-so-good question, and Ross saved the day. He had great answers, and we thank him for that. You guys thank him for it, too, and we'll see you next week.